All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our LinkedIn Live viewers to the Leaders Cafe, the 12th edition of the Leaders Cafe from TransforMe. This one is special for me in more ways than one. And Manu, you know that because this time we are bringing up not just a very interesting and relevant topic, but we're also bringing somebody into the conversation whose views I've always admired, so really excited. We're going to be talking about founder to CEO leadership realities in startups. And we're in conversation with Manu Rikhye today. Um, and I'll take a quick moment to talk a little bit about Manu. I could take a long time. It could take me an hour, but I'll try and take just maybe 30 seconds to talk a little bit about Manu. Um, Manu is the founding partner at Merak Ventures. He leads the deal evaluation for tech-led businesses and fund operations. Manu's an experienced fund manager and has led investments in a wide range of sectors, specifically around financial services, HR tech, healthcare, enterprise SaaS, and genomics. Manu is also the general partner in GrowX Ventures, Maiden Fund, where he actually helped raise $25 million and led investments in companies such as Advantage Club, ProgCap, and Zuddle. And we were just talking about Zadal just a while back, Manu. He's actively engaged as a board member in many of these investments, and he consciously helps support and nurture the founding teams. Before GrowX, Manu led the India operations of Encore Capital, a publicly listed US entity. And that's where he helped scale the business to more than 2,500 employees. And that unit contributed over $150 million EBITDA to the parent company. Manu also set up an India-focused ARC with the objective of deploying $500 million to buy distressed assets. Manu graduated from IHM Pusa and holds an executive MBA from IM Kolkata. And beyond all of this, I think one of the reasons why I was super excited to have Manu here is he's one of those few leaders, one of those few uh, fund managers who have found to have such a beautiful balance of left brain and right brain. And as we today talk about founder to CEO and the leadership realities in startups, and many of you joining in this chat are maybe leaders, CEOs, HR leaders, L&D leaders. I think Manu's perspectives around leadership development in general are also going to be super insightful. So welcome, Manu. Really good to have you here.
Thank you, Gatik. I'm super excited to be here. Obviously, there's a disclaimer. A lot of the stuff you've said, all the nice things, are biased because you're a dear friend and you care deeply about me. But it's a privilege being here. I'm happy to take this opportunity to give back to the ecosystem in some way, whether it's the corporate world or the startup world.
Brilliant. And we've got a lot of things to discuss. I mean, I have a lot of questions for you personally, things that I struggle with as well. And we've spoken about it in bits and pieces in the past as well. But I think more for the audience here and the people who are joining us live to understand how the dynamics of leadership may be different in a startup ecosystem. Would love to maybe as we kickstart this conversation at a broad level, get your views on because you have obviously worked in large organizations before. You've also set up funds and invested, and you're a board member for many organizations. So you've seen both sides really. And maybe I'd like to lead in by understanding from you what do you think are the principal differences in leadership behaviors, perhaps, in a startup versus a more established setup?
And I think one key difference is just access to resources, right? So when you're in a large organization, you have access to what seems like limited, but to a startup world, it seems like infinite resources. Uh, and resources not just in form of capital, but in form of talent, in form of tools, in form of other resources. So that's one big difference, and I think that plays out in how you lead an organization, how you work alongside people, what you expect from people, and also your personal contributions. I think that is one big difference. I think the other thing also is the big shift that you make in terms of ownership. I think as you're you start to build a business, you become a founder, you find a sixth gear in your vehicle, in yourself, and you find some unprecedented drive. And that's one thing I also remind our founders as they go out and recruit people and they're looking for folks to deliver in the same way as they have been delivering. And I caution them that nobody would be able to do what you do because that one gear, which is primarily driven by ownership and that mindset shift that happens, is lacking, right? So I think that's the second thing that comes to mind. I think third is uh, because of your commitment to the idea, you find a new level of perseverance, right? So you you stay committed longer, and the ones that become successful are the ones that have truly persevered through very very challenging, very difficult times, and all this living through VUCA world and volatility and all this chaos around you doesn't just become theory that you hear in boardrooms, presentations, etc. You're living that every day. Every day is a very challenging day when you're doing a startup. So I think um, you know it's a different world, and you need to realize that every decision you make or will actually make or break the company. It will have that significant impact on the outcome of your business.
Yeah, I love all those 3 points, and I was smiling through because I was kind of putting myself out there also in some cases and saying, yeah, all right, that kind of makes sense. And to me, as you say, resources, ownership, and perseverance, as key differences perhaps that leaders need to exhibit in a startup ecosystem, or what becomes different for them. And that kind of is a good segue and kind of leads Manu to the point that, so if resources are going to be scarce in a startup ecosystem, what what is it that you would recommend, or where is it that you've seen startup leaders being successful in the way they manage those resources, or manage that reality of lack of access to those resources coming from a large organization? Or when you talk about ownership and perseverance, I know this for a fact that there's so much talk about, when we work with startup organizations, they ask often from the founder is that, I want all my people to have a founder's mentality, right? I want all of them to operate with that bias for action and that cash flow and so on and so forth. So what what behaviors does that kind of lead to for a leader to really be successful in a startup ecosystem, Manu?
I think when it comes to resource constraint, and I'm glad you and I are having this conversation because you've gone through this journey and you built a fantastic business in TransforMe. And if you go back and think about your early days, uh, you had a choice for every rupee that you spend. Now, uh, the decision you make cannot always be that I'll not spend the money, right? So, what founders that become successful do very well is be very uh, focused around the outcome this dollar spent or rupee spent is going to create for me and for the business, right? So there are no feel good spends anymore. There are no, I have to do this because of either organizational pressure or it's the, expectation out of me. You become very focused around what is my business outcome that I want to drive, and is this spend needed to drive that? I think the flip side of this, sometimes the founder also face is they become too cautious, and if you become too
Yeah.
cautious, then you actually miss out on opportunities that are staring at you in the face, right? So you have to spend, you have to invest. Um, but you just have to be very focused on what is the outcome this dollar, this rupee will create for the business, right? I think now coming back to the corporate world and how ownership can drive that, I think one of the things that at Encore we had done very well as a larger firm, as a global firm, was really align incentives with the outcomes we wanted. So we created a very simple structure which helped people understand that if I delivered this today, this week, this month, then this is what it will do for my compensation for my career. I think organizations should try and build these linkages, and if you build this linkage successfully, then you'll really unleash a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. Because now I see what I'm doing as a part of my own world, as a part of my own job, meri dukaan, right? Irrespective of how you want to
Mm.
structure it, and and then you start to see probably a new level of contribution, new gear being developed. It may still never be the same as being the founder, but it'll come closer to that, right? It will help people step up and perform at a high level.
Yeah. No, I so resonate with that. And yes, you're right. I did see that bit as well of aligning incentives with the outcomes simply in the most simplistic way so people can really see it and feel it and understand it. I think that's critical. And in a while, we're going to pivot, Manu. I'd like for us to pivot this dialogue more around what HR and L&D leaders who are viewing this, who are in a startup organization, need to do differently and could look at differently. In a moment, we'll go there. And for the audience watching this, if you have questions, I'm seeing some brilliant comments coming in. Thank you. But if you have questions that come up to your mind that you'd like to ask Manu, that you'd love to get a perspective on, please keep them coming. We will, from time to time, be looking at the chat box and pick up something there. Uh, but coming back, and because you interact with so many startup founders, and I know some of the people viewing this would be people who'd want to and maybe exploring getting into the space and becoming a startup founder themselves. Uh, are there any? Uh, have you seen any pattern, Manu, when you speak to startup founders, early stages? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that some people might have, or some leader? I see that smile. But what do you think are the biggest misconceptions founders may have when it comes to building and growing a successful business? And I know you've got a
Yeah.
lot to share there.
No, I think we all have misconceptions about life in general. Uh, and what I found fascinating is that these misconceptions are so much influenced by the external environment that we're in, as expected. Um, I've gone through periods of time where people thought raising money is super easy and effectively a birthright. Like if I come to you, walk up to you and tell you I have an idea, it is your duty and responsibility to fund me because I've told you I have an idea, right? And if you don't, then shame on you because look, everybody else is getting money and everybody else is giving away money, and why aren't you? To the other extreme where people suddenly become very conservative that look, this is a very difficult environment, this is a very challenging environment, I don't know if I'll find the right capital, I'll find the right talent, I'll find the right resource, or the time for the ideas come. I think at the end of the day, in both scenarios, my test is that you just have to spend time developing your conviction, thinking through why this idea is right and why is this idea right for you. And if you've answered these two questions, then you should take the plunge, right? And only when you will take the plunge will you know all the things that you'll have to deal with. And that journey is very different for each one of us, right? Your journey as a founder was very different than mine, right? Because you're a superstar, you're very talented, you're very capable, you had it easy, right? Whereas when I came out of Encore and I had to start this journey, I had to really struggle. So I had a corner office at Encore, and I had a lot of resources, a lot of people available. I had a lot of support infrastructure available. And when I came out, I started to operate from a basement of an office, right? And from traveling uh, in better class of fares and optimizing my travel based on time duration of the flight to trying to hustle and find free tickets within my family that I could use to go from one destination to the other. It was a huge change, right? So each of us will have to go through this journey a little bit differently. Um, I'd encourage people to have a lot of conversations before they take the plunge with people who've done it, not just read print media and blogs and what the rest of the world thinks happens in the startup ecosystem. I'd strongly suggest talking to founders that have done it, that have built, founders that have been successful with what they build, and founders who are not so successful with what they build, because both have learnings, both have profound learnings. And if you're going to take that leap of faith in yourself and go out to build a business, then you should talk to these constituents because you'll find some insightful learnings from there.
Yeah, and I love what you said back there, Manu, about when you started speaking about the misconceptions that people have when they think about becoming a founder or founded starting something, is that they literally these kind of two extremes, right? On one side, they would have this thought, "Ki, if I'm going to a VC, then, funding comes easy and it should come to me," kind of a thing. On the other side, complete other extreme, and that's you said something that it's driven mostly by the noise that you hear. So in essence, what I'm also hearing you say is that listen to everybody, but also listen to your inner voice and kind of connect with that and figure that out and do have conversations, because a lot of misconceptions are driven by the noise that may be around you as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, and also when you say listen to everybody before listening to your inner self, I think who this everybody is very important, right? So I'd encourage people to listen to the right constituents, right stakeholders who are closer to this than just general, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely makes sense. Now I know that you've also mentored a lot of founders, Manu, and you've helped them either a part of their investment journey or beyond that. And I know that for a fact. Some situations we've had where you've shared some experiences, you've also been a mentor to me. Uh, but can you maybe share an incident or an experience just to help some of the viewers watching who may be inclined towards this journey to understand, also what that journey could look like, and how do they when they find a mentor, what could that look like? And if you could talk about an experience where you mentored a startup founder, what did you do to help them succeed? Where is it that they needed most help, for example?
Yeah. So, first I have to confess that, last 4 years have been more about reverse mentoring, me learning more than I've been able to give to people. It's been true for most of my life, most of my career, but even more so in the last 4 years. I've been very privileged to work alongside founders that probably are the best talent in the country, right? This is one of the things I was most excited about in terms of what I'm doing, which is just being able to work with some of the best people, most talented folks that India has to offer. Um, but obviously, as we build these businesses, there are always conversations that I would have experienced or dealt with in the past, and we can therefore have a chat about that based on my experience and see if some of my learnings are relevant in this scenario. And so one theme that comes across very often across you know across early stage founders is that they're looking to build uh, businesses and solve problems, right? So when they start off, they have one large problem in mind and one potential solution. As they go about building this solution and looking to solve this problem, they find other multiple opportunities, right? Because as we say in India, you step outside your house, you'll see a ton of opportunities because there are a ton of problems. So each one of the problem in a founder mindset is an opportunity because that's their DNA. So when they look at these opportunities, often they start to get distracted, right? So one of the things we do a lot of with our founders is just remind them that look, resources are finite. You have limited time to build a product, make enough progress to showcase that the problem is real and you have a potential solution for the problem. If you start addressing multiple problems simultaneously, you'll not make enough progress on any, and you'll run out of the capital that you've raised. So reminding them to stay focused, and this is true for all our lives. But again, when you have finite resources, your decisions could make or break the company, and therefore it becomes that much more front and center. Um, the other thing, like we discussed, we're all human beings. We're all often affected a lot by what we hear, and we sometimes have to talk people off the edge in terms of what they're hearing, what they're synthesizing. So today, the pendulum for funding has swung the other way, which means that there is a lot of doom and gloom. You talk to people, and there are more companies that are struggling to raise money than the companies that are successfully raising money. And it seems like there's no end in sight for this shift. And at that time, we often remind our founders that look, if you will build a valuable business, you will find the capital because capital always chases value. So
Mm.
shut out the noise and focus on the fundamentals of your business, and keep making progress. Keep walking one step at a time, and you'll see people starting to take notice. And there is a company in our portfolio called Advantage Club. Just outstanding founding team. And when we started partnering with them 4 years ago, it was hard for people to understand that business because they were building an employee retention and recognition platform, right?
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. You spoke
uh,
to me about that. I remember them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So people were unsure, how many corporates would operate, what is the value prop. And having been at Encore, I realized that this is a very important tool where I can give a stack of benefits out to my employees and allow them to seamlessly consume it because these guys had at the other end of the platform stitched up 10,000 brands, where my employees could both consume the benefits that I was giving, but also avail perks by virtue of being an employee of our organization. They could get a certain benefit. Uh, and when we invested in them, people were unsure, and the hope was that they'll get to $1 million of revenue, and the world will start to take notice. And they did get to $1 million. And then when we talk to investors, they'd say, I don't know, I don't think they'll get to 5 million, or 3 to 5 million. And they got to 3 to 5 million, and people like, maybe I don't know, I don't know if they'll get to 10 million. And very few companies, despite all this noise that you hear about unicorns, and you see all this excitement about funding, etc., have been able to reach the 10 million, 15 million ARR threshold in India, right? And they're now close to 10 million ARR. They're a global company serving 60 countries. They have a SaaS offering. And every time I'd meet the founder, I felt the frustration. I felt the disappointment that, like, why don't people get it, right? And why do people keep shifting the goalpost? And the only answer I had was keep walking, right? One step at a time. And eventually someone will have to notice, because you have to create something that is so, uh, you know, enviable in some ways, that everybody wants to be a part of what you're building. And he's there.
Yeah, and
The team is there.
I love that point around managing distractions, because I get caught in that trap so often, even now. But I think that's what you're really talking to, Manu, is about, just kind of not being aware, but just managing those distractions really, really well, and not letting that noise kind of govern what next steps you're taking, and just make it good enough so that capital chases you versus the other way around. Love that. And since you spoke about Advantage Club and HR tech kind of a space, I know a lot of our uh, viewers here would be representing the HR and L&D community, Manu. From a leadership in a startup ecosystem, what do you think HR, L&D leaders need to be looking at differently when they're, because there's obviously all of this talk around leadership development and leadership in a startup ecosystem. It is different. But are we applying the same coat of paint? Uh, do the HR leaders and the L&D leaders need to look at development of their talent differently? And if so, what according to you is that different? Any examples, any insights could be quite helpful.
Yeah, so first thing I would suggest is that we have to truly embrace and accept the fact that the world is changing faster than we could ever imagine. Right? So if it is changing faster than we could ever imagine, from in terms of what the expectations are, what the deliverables are, what the talent availability is, talent mix is, and on top of all of this, how generative AI or other tools, technology is disrupting how traditionally we've done business, right? So how do we as individuals equip ourselves to upskill ourselves and be more informed of what's happening in the outside world, and then use that knowledge, information to bring more value to what we do, and our roles and expectations help for us by the organization. So I think the first step is just getting to know a lot more about what's happening in the outside world. And one of the things I used to do when I was at Encore uh, was I started to invest a little bit of my money as an angel uh, into these early stage companies to figure out what they were doing, what they were building, what is the progress they were making. Because I was in 2013, 12, 13, starting to feel that technology is going to completely change how every industry operates. And in the corporate world, I had a full-time job, right? While I did nothing, not much, but I was expected to be in a ton of meetings, which didn't allow me enough time to go read up and do other things that was required. So my approach, my strategy was to deploy a little bit of capital, get front row seats so that I could get information and access also to founders that were building this. Uh, each one of us should find our own hook to kind of get access to this information, this knowledge. The second specific expectation I have or recommend is to kind of just be more open to the tools that are being developed outside, right? So there are, whenever our portfolio companies go and sell to businesses, and as you know, we are a B2B tech focused fund. We look at investing in ideas that matter and make a difference to people's lives, to corporates, to the larger environment. our experience is that whenever a startup founder goes and sells the idea to the enterprise, they're very slow to embrace, right? And they're slow to embrace because there are not enough proof points. They're often waiting for others to uh, take it, consume it, adopt it, and then if there are enough proof points, then it becomes easier for me to go and champion it with my boss. My experience with that process often also is that by the time you adopt it, that technology, that process is less relevant. So at Encore we had 3 or 4 HR systems, right? We had Workday, we had PeopleSoft, we had a couple others, and we were all still frustrated. Annual review processes were still clunky. Recruitment process was still broken. The leaders were satisfied, dissatisfied. So there were lots of issues because the products that were built 15 years ago were not as relevant for what our needs today were, and maybe they didn't even suit the size of the organization we were because we were a small 2,000 people company. So I think just having the courage to go out and adopt new technologies so that they unleash value, right? The more current or more recent the product or technology is, more likely that it is going to meet your needs because the founders have spent a lot of time understanding pain points and are looking to solve for those pain points. So just put out there what your pain points and interrogate. I think the third thing is just about skill, right, and leadership. And I think that's a difficult one. That's a very, very difficult and challenging one. And I think you need to have clearly defined expectations. It starts with what the organization objectives are, and then bringing it down all the way to what is the talent needed, and then how do you keep that talent and its talent skill set current, right? And that's where partners like TransforMe become very helpful because you're developing on 2 fronts, right? So you have to develop people on the business slash technical acumen of their roles, and the other is on the leadership role. And in both, you need help, you need support. I think sometimes also invigorating the organization by talent that has done this before, right? That have operated in early stage ecosystems before could be very helpful. From my personal experience, now when I look back at how I used to spend my day at Encore, and in my corporate role, my day used to be fully packed, right? So I used to take a lot of pride as an organization. We used to take a lot of pride that our meetings are not 30 minutes, they're 25 minutes, and an hour-long meeting is always scheduled for 50 minutes, so that it ends on time, and we can be in time for the next meeting. And 8 hours of non-stop meetings. Today, when I look back, I'm telling you, all of that was just bullshit. It was just crap. I didn't need to do 3/4 of those meetings. Often those meetings were to make sure that people feel good about themselves. There was a lot of debate about who has a seat on the table, less about what needed to be solved, what was the problem, and what was the most efficient way of solving that. Sometimes getting too many opinions, making sure everybody's voice is heard, also brings in a lot of sluggishness, bureaucracy, unnecessary hassle. Sometimes just people sitting across the table, 2 of them chatting over the side of a desk over coffee is the best way to solve problems. So bring in people that have operated like that, right? That operate like that, or that have done that, or have the expertise in helping the organization go on that journey. That will help, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that I connect with the meeting bits. I was laughing when you said that, but that's so true. And I don't think startups have that luxury in any case of wasting time like that. And that is again is one big difference about choosing your priorities and choosing how you want to kind of build the culture of the organization. And you did say that the solve for leadership development in a startup is difficult, and I completely resonate with that, Manu, because we've built a program for startup leadership for startup organizations. But I'd love to pick your brains on if you were to, and yeah, it's a bit of a broad-based question, but if you were to pick up the top 3 skills, Manu, that you feel L&D leaders who are watching this need to focus on to develop the leaders within their startup, whether it's the CXO level, where's the next level or the next level, what do you think would be the top 3 or 4 skills that you think the L&D leaders should be really thinking about?
So that's a great question, because if you're in a corporate world, the skills you probably need to think about are different than if you're in the startup world, because there people are anyways
Absolutely.
strong drivers. So I think one thing you'd asked this earlier as well in terms of opportunities to help founders. One skill that I think uh, startup organizations need uh, strongly is the ability to navigate difficult decisions, right? So a lot of the founders are very young and founding teams are very young. They haven't dealt with conflict, right? So their approach either is, and this is what most of them do, is avoid conflict or avoid difficult conversations. And the remaining actually hold them, but hold them very, very poorly, right? So I think that's one thing that if you're in the startup world, you should start to focus a lot on, right? How do you have these difficult conversations? How do you have manage conflict within the organization or externally, right? How do you hold your service partners, vendors, everybody else accountable to the deliverables that that you expect from them? So that's one theme. I think the other is just softer aspect of leadership around, irrespective of what you're building, right? So uh, we have a portfolio company called Pixel. When we invested in them, there were two boys in college and they had a vision that they will build a constellation of 24 satellites with hyperspectral imagery, and by 2050 they want to do asteroid mining. Just
So, by the
exceptionally
way, I didn't
talented.
understand most of that stuff, but it sounds really high tech and
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
know it all. I can tell you how the satellite is made.
Right, right.
That's
Yeah.
why we complement each other. Sheetal and I. He looks at all the deep tech ventures. He understands all the science behind it. I look at the
Super
people, right?
exciting. Yeah.
So when they were in college, they had this bold vision, and they had a very detailed plan on how they were going to go about it. They blew our mind away, and today they have three operational satellites, right? So they've achieved that milestone. They're well on their way to get to the 24 odd satellites that they need to launch, and they've now become the poster child of space tech industry. But the reason I bring up that example is that about 2 years ago, I think a year and a half into their journey, and 2 years ago from today, they'd shared a deck with me around culture, around what they wanted the organizational culture to be.
Wow.
It blew my mind. It was one of the most succinct, profound, and sharp message that I'd ever seen around culture. And I've worked across some very large brands that talk a lot about culture. We'd spent a lot of time thinking about culture, and I took a lot of pride in what we'd created. But I'm telling you, it was insignificant. So the second thing that I think startup leadership, HR, L&D should think about is the softer aspect about building the company, right? So what are your people practices? What are your leadership practices? And actually, what is your culture? And how can you make that into a living document? How can you give that to people as a toolkit so that it becomes easier for people to assimilate? So I think those would be the top two.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so powerful about these two founders who built this. And in the first 2 years, if they had a culture deck built in, then that's super spectacular. Because I often feel that with a lot of startup organizations, that often comes as an afterthought on culture, people, and so on and so forth. So that's quite exciting. And I also love the first point that you said about the most critical skill in your mind that needs to be built is around navigating through difficult conversations. And that's bang on, because when we work with some of our clients that we try and help, that's the constant need that we keep hearing, that there are undercurrents, they're not, people are not closing the loop, and we end up doing a lot of that work. And I think that's a big one to solve for. That's a big one to solve for. Thanks for sharing that, Manu. uh, I'm going to take and just checking on time, we've got a few minutes to go, but I wanted to pick on a few questions, Manu, that we're getting from the group here. And there are some names that I recognize from our past lives as well, which is brilliant to see, which is beautiful to see. Um, I'm going to take the first question from Praveen Kumar, Manu. And Praveen's question, you can see that there right on the screen. What are the challenges one can face while transitioning from corporate life to an entrepreneur? I know you spoke about this, but if you can maybe summarize that a bit, Manu, for Praveen and the others, that'd be super helpful.
Sure. So one big change that you will experience, irrespective of where you are in your life, is that sense of security goes away, right? So no matter how much you hate your job, how much you hate the corporate you work in, it gives you a safety net. A monthly check comes in that allows you to live a certain lifestyle that just completely gets disrupted, right? The second, like I said earlier, was the level of ownership. Now everybody's looking to you. In my past life, I used to say, look, everybody wants to be a CEO till you become one, because when you become one, you realize that you can't pass the responsibility or the blame to anybody else, right? When people are walking up to you and they want an outcome or a decision, there's nobody else. You've got to make that decision, and the decision you make will affect many lives, right? So that burden is something that takes time getting used to. The impact takes time getting used to. And the third probably is just access to um, the top, resources. Like I said, you're just used to a lot of resources. You used to have working with a talent pool of certain style. That's one struggle that I had, that I was also expected to now do a bunch of things, right? So I was expected to make PowerPoint presentations, and it is not one of my strong suits. And it was such a struggle. Like I pulled my hair out, and I lost quite a few of them as a result. Uh,
You eventually had to
to
get
make
somebody to help you with those. I remember that.
to make transition, right? And it was really difficult. Um, so so there is nobody else that you can delegate a lot of tasks to. You've got to step up and do all the things. There's no job that's too small, and there's nobody else that you can send to the bigger meetings. You've got to be able to switch between different diverse roles.
Awesome, awesome. And I can see we've got some founders here, or aspirational founders. We've got some interesting questions there. I'd like to pick up this one from Ruchika Bhardwaj. And it's really about diversifying, Manu. It's on the screen for you, but um, your views on that.
Um, you know, uh, I that's a great question. I think the answer for me always has been no. So one of the reasons our thesis is very clear, we only invest in B2B tech businesses, is because we don't understand businesses where you keep investing capital with the hope that one day you'll make revenue, right? The businesses we've invested in, all 16 of them, um, have a very strong business model, will stand on their own 2 feet, and will not need external investor capital to succeed. Um, there are folks that build those businesses. Like I said, I don't understand how that works and how you ever see real return on your capital, but many of them have been very successful, and the reason they're successful is that they're targeting a very large market. And if in the end of the 100 companies you're the only one left surviving, then you'll be a very large business. And Flipkart is an example of that. Ola is an example of that. Oyo in some ways is an example of that. So if you can convince enough investors that you are the right team, you are the right business, then you'll have access to enough capital to hopefully be the last person standing. And if you are, then you're invaluable, right? Our approach is that, look, let's focus on fundamentals. Let's look at what will it take to build this business well. What is the unit economic in this business, and therefore future plans of this business and cash flow, profitability, etc. look like, and is this team capable to building it? And if it is, then we will go down that path.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say to Ruchika is your personal view is to stick to what your strengths are, and not get distracted by it. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Manu?
Yeah, I'm saying, look, at the end there are two approaches, right? You could um, I'm saying I know my strength. I
Got it.
only logically align with the question, which is it makes no sense to invest 100 to get 10 back. So that's one point. And the extension of that is that actually you should just stick to what you think is right. I'm not saying the other is wrong. Other is just not for me, right? I don't understand it. It's not for me. And therefore, I'm not venture down that path. You've got to figure out what's right for you. And once you develop that conviction, then you should just go chase it.
Superb, superb. We're going to take one more question from Krishnan, and then I have a final question for you, Manu. So, question from Jay Krishnan AG around an MVP, Manu. Should we plan starting to take revenue from an MVP, or should it only be to take feedback to improve your actual product? Your
I
view
think
on
it's a
that,
great
Manu.
question. It's a great question. I think the first is that you should have supreme focus on getting an MVP out, right? Because that's the ultimate test. Everything else is just an idea. It's only when you have the minimum viable product out in the market that you start the feedback loop. Now, I'd encourage that you should start the monetization very early. You may start it at a very small level. The reason for that is, especially if you're building a B2B product or even a B2C product, if you give things for free, it's very difficult to switch human behavior to come back and make them pay for it, right? You look at your own self, how you've consumed services. The minute, and I've said this for these free delivery or 10-minute delivery businesses, they're all fantastic, wonderful, beautiful. But when you will ask customers to pay for them, I think you'll see very, very strong drop off, right? So it may seem like you've hit the product market fit through the MVP, uh, but unless real people are paying real money for it, it's a false sense of success. So get the MVP out, uh, start seeding the initial idea that, look, it has to be a paid product. You may initially discount it to get some feedback, early feedback, and comfort and advantage to early users, and very quickly turn it into a proper paid product.
Got it. Got it. That's a good input for me as well, Manu. That was kind of my question as well. So, love that. And, since we're talking about leadership realities in a startup ecosystem and how they are different and how we need to address that, and you've addressed your side of the thing, and which is beautiful, Manu. The way we at TransforMe are helping startups is navigate through this is by offering specific courses, specific programs on leadership development for startups. We'd address some of these things that you spoke about, difficult conversations and stuff like that. Um, my question to you is, when do you think, or how soon should a startup organization start looking at investing in leadership development or investing in their people development? How soon? Because, like you spoke about culture earlier, sometimes it's an afterthought. Sometimes initially you're just kind of rushing to break even or kind of hit your first milestone, second milestone, so on and so forth. What's your view on how soon should employee development, leadership development be looked at from a startup lens?
So I think it should be looked at from day one, because when you're a founder and you have a team working alongside you, you're constantly investing time coaching and developing them. And if you, it does seem like a harder path sometimes, because having someone shadow or asking someone to do the task as opposed to doing it yourself, in the short term seems time consuming. But if you do not make that transition, and do not spend and make that investment rather in handholding people, developing people, helping people along, what you'll end up doing is you'll always be stuck doing a lot of the transactional stuff and never will be able to free up your time to do the more strategic things or make more meaningful impact, right? So your mindset always has to be that I have to develop people all around me, take them along, so that I can delegate more and I can grow more and contribute more. Now, that's at an early stage of the organization. And I think once you find enough resources in the organization that you can hire people, full time, part time partners to help address some of these coaching needs, I think it's a very important investment, right? So, um, that's something that in many of our companies we see founders doing really early on, right? Some have raised Series B, 7, 8, 10 million, and they're still starting to invest heavily in finding the right leadership, finding the right HR leader, investing in partners that help solve, that culture, right? The founders may have come
Yeah.
up with a need, but they hired partners to help them think through it, ask them the right questions so that they could verbalize what their expectations were.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks, Manu. And I have to take this as the last question. I'm sorry, I said last question earlier, but I just have to take this. It's a question from somebody who seems to have worked with you in the past, Zishan Pervez, and
Of course.
he talks about you. He talks about how he's seen you in the past, and obviously he's wanting to get your broad insights on leadership courage. That's really his anchor when he sees you. So, anything you'd like to share with Parvez and some of the others?
Hey, Zishan, it's good to see you here, and thank you for those kind words. We should catch up outside of this session. Um, I think, again, the leadership courage bit in large part of corporates uh, is a more individualistic thing, right? You often see people demonstrating it, you sometimes see people not demonstrating it, and both sets of people sometimes see success. So it's very confusing when you're emulating leaders, because success sometimes is disconnected from leadership courage, right? On making the hard decisions, right decisions, etc., etc. But if you want to run a business of your own, if you want to be a founder, if you are one already, then you have no choice, right? It's like you fighting on the front, and you dealing with enemy fire every day, and you can't afford to duck, because if you duck, you know everybody around you, everybody that's relying on you, your business, your company, your employees, your partners, everybody's going to go away, right? None of it will survive. So you have to master the courage. And sometimes when people are put in these situations, and there's an old saying, "Come of the hour, come of the man," and it could be a woman that when they're put into these situations, they find that extra sense, right? They find that extra
Right.
gear, as I keep calling it, and are able to demonstrate it. And the ones that
Beautiful,
don't
beautiful.
fail, they'll absolutely fail, Zishan. So, it's a do or die skill then.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard you use that find that extra gear so many times before, but it's a good reminder, and I think that's one term that I'm definitely taking away from this. So, Manu, this has been brilliant. This has been super. This has been really exciting, right from talking about the differences being from resources to ownership to perseverance to talking about how the leadership realities are different in a startup ecosystem to talking about how we need to stay focused and manage the distractions to sharing with us what you feel are the top 2 or 3 leadership behaviors that need to be focused on in a startup ecosystem to sharing your own personal examples and experiences. I think this has really been super, super insightful, Manu. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Leaders Cafe. I've always enjoyed chatting up with you, but this one, like I said, was special for me. I know you're traveling and you're in the middle of your work travel, and you still made time to get into this chat with us. So, really, really appreciate that. And look forward to catching up with you in person sometime soon, Manu.
Yeah, thank you, Gatik, for having me here, and it's been a lot of fun. I am really in awe of what Sandra and you have created. It's just outstanding. I am very proud, and I know you're meant to do great things, and both of you will continue to change people's life and make a large thing in this universe. So it's a privilege having worked alongside both of you.
Thank you so much, boss. Thank you so much. You take care, and
Yeah.
thanks once again. And thank you, everyone, for joining in.